Jessica, you can go on the record now, okay?
Okay, Judge.
Adair Circuit Court shall come to order. I'm David Williams, Circuit Judge in the 40th Judicial Circuit, sitting as a special assigned judge in this case. We're here to consider case number 03-CR-0008, Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Blake P. Walker, and we have a petition for expungement. Represents the Commonwealth in this case.
Judge, I'm here, Brian Wright, Commonwealth's attorney for Adair Circuit Court.
And who represents the petitioner?
Since April, Your Honor, for Blake Walker, the petitioner.
Okay. And I see Mr. Walker's here and other people, I assume, that are interested parties or that are going to be witnesses. Now, to kind of set the predicate in this situation, the defendant by counsel and personally has moved for an expungement after KRS 431. And as a Commonwealth of Kentucky, as the Commonwealth attorney for the Circuit Court, you file objection to that expungement. Is that correct, Mr. Wright?
That's correct, Your Honor. Yes, sir.
Take exception to it.
Yes, sir.
Well, I have read the memorandum in support of expungement, and as far as what the standard of proof, clear and convincing evidence or other, but I think that since either one of those standards is within the sound discretion of the court, that it's not really.
No, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Specifically, the clear and convincing is only limited to section 1D, and that is felonies that were.
That's what I was going to say, so I'm not going to hold that standard.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. I'm having a little trouble hearing. I apologize.
Well, always do. So I said we're not going to hold that standard because we're dealing with sound discretion of the court, and there's no reason. I think it's fairly clear that could or could not apply, but I don't think it's particularly relevant in this case. So I'm not going to require that standard. You're going to go ahead and present. How many witnesses are you going to present? Witnesses? I've read what you sent down to me very carefully. I had an afternoon yesterday and this morning after our rule day ended earlier. Do you wish to call witnesses live, or do you wish to call Mr. Walker, or how do you want to proceed, Mr. April? I'm going to just.
Well, the first thing, I'm sorry. The first thing I wanted to know is, because there wouldn't be a hearing except for Mr. Walker's objection to the expungement, who has the burden? I'm sorry, Mr. Wright. Who has the burden of going forward, and who has the burden of proof, since we wouldn't have a hearing except for his objection? I mean, I'll do it whatever way you want. I'm just trying to understand.
It would appear to me that the defendant has the burden of going forward. I've never done an expungement, quite frankly, that required a hearing. I've had expungements objected to and turned down, and nobody ever said anything about it. But it would appear to me that if you don't have any evidence other than what you submitted to me, there would be no reason to repeat the evidence of the witnesses that have provided these statements, unless you want to do that for the record. Are you planning, Mr. Wright, are you planning on calling any witnesses?
Judge, I have the retired Detective Ricky Underwood, who was the case officer here, as retired Detective Tony Wales, available to testify in the event the court has any questions about facts and or their position. I can tell you what the
here's the thing about it is, I don't know anything about the facts, and I don't know anything about their position, and what you say, although no reason to doubt you, it is not testimony.
Right, and that's why I have them here, Judge, in case.
Yeah, you've had an opportunity to read the memorandum in support of expungement, Mr. Wright. Is there anyone in there that's present today that you wish to cross-examine or take any additional statement?
Judge, only in the event that Dr. Herner, I don't imagine he's here, but
Yes, he is.
Dr. Herner is here. Okay. Judge, I just had a couple of questions for him about his letter.
Okay, Mr. April,
Here's what I'm sorry.
would you like to put the doctor on first and take his testimony and then let Mr. Wright cross-examine?
I'll be glad to do that. I just wanted to say this, that I assume from what you said, you will treat the letters as if they were testimony.
I will. That's the reason I asked Mr. Wright if he wanted to cross-examine.
Here's what I'm sorry.
We're going to have to do a little delay here when we quit talking. Let me do like this when I quit talking, okay?
Oh, that would be helpful.
I read the letters and family members and other things that were submitted, and I have no doubt that they were difficult letters to write in a difficult situation, but that they were well intended and they believe what they say. And I don't know what they could add, but I'd be willing to take as much time as you need, Mr. April, to put this proof on, because I know it's very important to your client and to the members of the family.
I would like to start by putting on Blake, just so you hear from the person seeking expungement.
Okay.
And then I would put the doctor on next. And depending on how things go, maybe one more witness under the circumstance you said. I have 5 or 6 witnesses available.
Mr. Wright, I would suggest that you call the retired, I see Officer Wells on there, and is your other witness on also?
Ricky Underwood's on here. I don't know if he doesn't have a video feed going, but I see his name on my screen.
I see it there too. Mr. Underwood, do you have a video capacity where you are? Your microphone is not turned on now. You'll need to click your microphone. Are you just going to be audio, or do you have video capacity?
I thought I had video too, but I don't see it's not working.
You need to click on there. Maybe it's a separate click. Should be a little camera there. Mr. Underwood?
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm trying to get it going. It's not working for some reason. The video.
Yeah. It might not be working for the same reason that mine doesn't frequently work, in that I don't hit the correct button sometimes and need some. But as long as you continue to try to work on that, turn your microphone off, and
Yes, sir.
then continue to try to work on your camera. Officer Wells, I saw that you had some assistance there. You're going to be able to turn your microphone on when it's time. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll be able to.
Okay, thank you. Mr. April, you can call your first witness, please.
I would call Blake Walker.
Blake Walker, will you raise your right hand, please? You swear the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So help me God, I do.
Okay, you may lower your hand and answer Mr. April's questions.
Please state your full name
Blake Peterson Walker,
and where do you reside now?
Louisville, Kentucky, 802 Creetown Court.
Are you presently employed?
Yes.
What are the jobs you have?
I work as an HVAC technician's helper for Prudential Heating and Air in Louisville. And on my off days, I help Rick Elper's framing construction company frame houses. And I'm also training dogs on the side nights and weekends sometimes.
Is that volunteer work, the last one?
No, I get paid for it.
How long did you serve in prison?
17 years.
Can you briefly explain to the court why you want this expungement of your criminal record and the vacation of your conviction, so that, and with the realization that the judge has read your letter, so you don't have to cover everything in the letter?
Yes, sir. When I was 16, I committed a horrible act. I acted out of a series of horrible decisions, and I regret that day always, and I will always regret that day. I was lucky enough and blessed by Matt Bevin to receive a pardon, which I neither asked for nor expected. We did ask for a commutation of sentence. And in the last year, I've come to realize, as I'm starting a new life as an adult for the first time, how many obstacles come before a person when they are a convicted felon. There are job opportunities that they will never be able to have. There are housing for some retirement communities, will not allow felons to live there. I plan on having children someday and pass on some of the values that my parents believed in. And I hope that I am able to participate in their lives as fully as possible. And I know as a convicted felon, there are some things that I will not be able to do in their lives. I'll not be able to coach sports teams. I will not be able to chaperone events at church and school sometimes. I will not be able to go certain places where they're allowed to go. And I just hope to have a full involvement in my children's lives in the future. And I hope that my history does not hurt them and their upbringing and their lives.
Do you realize that even with an expungement of all of the records connected to your offenses, that you will sometimes run into people who will know what happened and what you did and what you were convicted of?
Of course. I know when I go to try to buy my first home and I go to the bank to get a loan, that if I was expunged, I might have better options for interest and loans. And this is in a legal setting where they would do a background check. But as I meet people in the world, normal people don't do background checks. They Google people. And so I realize that everybody I meet has the ability on their phone in 5 seconds to find out my entire history, as the newspapers have put it, you know. And so everybody that I come in contact with will have that ability to know my past.
Why do you think that you warrant an expungement? Why do you think you deserve an expungement?
I believe that an expungement will give me the opportunity to live a full and unhindered life. This has nothing to do with the guilt that I carry and that I feel every day. I know that I have done wrong in my life. I just hope to live the future in a better way that will make my parents and my family proud and give me every opportunity to succeed in the world.
Throughout the criminal process, you've pled guilty, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I pled guilty and I took a plea bargain August 3rd of 2003. I've never argued my guilt. And even with the commutation and pardon, I was 100% forward. And when I meet people, like the job I have now at Prudential and the framing company, when I meet them, I feel like it is an obligation for me to tell a potential employer some of my history. And so I've been very open and honest with all the people that I work with and my boss. And I'm ashamed of my actions, but I am not ashamed of the history since then. I grew a lot in prison and I changed a lot. And I'm definitely a different man now than I was when I was 16.
Even though you pled to murder, was the action that you were involved in killing your parents, was that premeditated, planned at all?
No, it was a night that my father and I had been locked in the house for 5 days because it had snowed, and I wasn't at school. He wasn't working at the time. And for 5 days, we just fought and argued all the time. And that night I was drinking and we'd been into it, and it happened. I did not plan it. I did not, I didn't plan it. No, it happened.
And where did it happen in your home?
Downstairs in the living room.
Was that a basement or?
Well, it was a 2-level house. And so the first floor is a walk-in, and then the second floor is a walk-out because it's built on a hill. And so it wasn't a basement, it was our living room. So all of the bedrooms were downstairs and the TV room was downstairs. It wasn't exactly a basement. The back of the house was definitely ground level.
What room did it actually occur in, the killings?
The living room where the TV was, our TV.
Is there anything in particular that you would like to say to Judge Williams about this other than what you've testified to and written in your letter?
I know the term execution style has been thrown around, and I perceive that very differently than some people do. And I kind of cringe at that because I think that the normal person, when I first heard it, that you have somebody under your control and you're dictating their actions. And it was nothing like that. It just happened. And there were no commands given. I did not control them in any way. I cringe at that because it makes me feel like people see me as some cold-blooded monster, and that's not who I am, and that's not who I want to be.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, would you like to inquire of the witness?
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Mr. Walker. You said you did not request the pardon, did you?
No, my family and I requested a commutation of sentence, which would simply reduce the sentence. And on his own, without being asked, Governor Bevin gave a full unconditional pardon.
And I noticed in some of the pleadings filed by your counsel that you indicated recently you got the opportunity to meet with Mr. Bevin and speak with him about the pardon he gave to you.
Yes, sir.
How did that meeting come about?
I stopped by his house and knocked on his door to thank him.
And is that close to where you are living now?
It's 5 or 6 miles away. It's in Louisville, yeah.
All right. The family members that you are living with now that are about 5 miles from Mr. Bevin's home, do they know him?
No, they have talked to him on the phone the night. A week before I received my pardon, Matt Bevin called them to discuss the letters that they had written for the commutation attempt. And so my aunt and uncle talked to him on the phone for about 30 minutes. And as far as I know, that's all the contact they've ever had with him.
And they live about 5 or 6 miles from him?
Yes, sir.
Did they also communicate with any other persons that might have been affiliated with Mr.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this time.
Well, Mr. April, you brought out the fact that,
Wait just a second, Mr. Wright. Let him state his objection.
yes,
There's no basis to attack the pardon here. There is no, I can state on the record that I checked with the family members after the pardon to find out whether anybody had even contributed anything to Matt Bevan, and was told that they hadn't. There is no basis for these questions because the pardon isn't an issue. The only thing that is an issue is whether the pardon would allow whether he can be expunged.
Okay, Mr. Wright, let's move on. I mean, I think you've inquired as to Mr. Walker's involvement in it, and I think that he doesn't seem to have any other information, so let's move on, okay?
all right. Mr. Walker, you indicated that you want this expungement to be able to help you in children's lives and coaching and school, and I don't know if you mentioned church activities, but in things such as that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So if you apply as a mentor through a school system, or as a coach, or as a youth group leader through the church, would you anticipate disclosing the fact that when you were younger, you killed both of your parents to the persons that would be making the decision to hire you or to place you in that position? Would you anticipate disclosing that to them if you're granted this expungement?
Objection, hypothetical question.
Well, you asked a hypothetical.
Overruled. Continue.
Go ahead.
All right. So I believe that when people meet me and they see who I am today, they will be able to look past my mistakes and my past actions. If an employer is looking at me and they do not know me, all they're looking at is a piece of paper, and they see this person is a convicted felon for 2 counts of murder, they are automatically going to throw me out. But if they look at this and they know me and they get to know me, I think people will be able to look past my actions in a much more total picture. So yes, I've been very open with my employers. My bosses, the whole company I work for now knows exactly what I've done. And if they ask questions, I'm more than happy to elaborate.
I guess I'm talking about in the future, if this expungement is granted and that piece of paper in there to show them when they run a background check what you did when you were younger, would you intend to voluntarily disclose that if the record had been expunged? If the record is expunged and sealed?
Ask and answer.
No, he didn't answer that question.
I don't think he was completely responsive. I think he was, be more directly responsive, Mr.
Okay.
Walker.
Yes, I've always been very open, and I will continue to be very open. I just think that if it is on the paper in black and white, I will automatically get denied. But if people, because there are certain restrictions for people, you're not allowed to do this if you've been convicted of these felonies, automatically I will be thrown out. But if I have an expungement and it is not technically on my record, even when they find out my history, when I share my history, they will be able to look at me as a person and not as a convicted felon and throw me out because of this.
And it would be your opinion then that they would be able in that situation to make a more informed decision?
Yes, they would be able. I'm sorry.
Do you think it would be important for them to make an informed decision about whether to place you in a position with children, or in a position where firearms were around, or a position of leadership? Don't you think it would be better for them to be able to make a fully informed decision?
I do think that they should make a fully informed decision, and they should get to know me as well as my past. If all they are looking at is my past, They do not have an informed decision. All they have is something black and white on paper, and they don't know me as a person. So this would give the chance to let them know me fully as a person and not just as a single act in my life.
You've talked about some situations you're in now, jobs that you're holding, places where you're working with dogs. Those folks have apparently been able to make a fully informed decision and place you in that position.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
they've had access to your record.
Yes, absolutely.
And nothing's been hidden from them.
No.
But
Not
you're
at all.
asking to hide this from folks in the future if the record is expunged or sealed. Wouldn't that be correct?
No, I'm not asking to hide anything. I carry it with me and I talk about it all the time. My parents are always on my mind.
It would be hidden from those that might want to look at the background to see what went into this case if the record was sealed.
You cannot hide Google, and I would never hide my past or my parents. This is something that is part of my life.
Now, I want to talk because Judge Williams did not participate in the trial or plea of this matter, and I assume has not seen a PSI report or any report of the facts. You indicated in questioning by Mr. April that this is something that just happened. I don't know if you used the word spontaneous or if that's just in some of the material that he's filed, but you used the word that it just happened. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Tell Judge Williams what you shot your father with.
A 9mm semi-automatic rifle.
And tell Judge Williams where on his body you shot your father.
In the back of the head.
And tell Judge Williams how long you looked at the back of your father's head through the scope before you pulled the trigger.
I'm not sure.
Do you recall telling a friend that you aimed the gun at your father's head for about 5 minutes, thinking about how easy it would be to kill him before you pulled the trigger?
I do not recall that conversation. I was pretty drunk that night, and the events afterwards, I was in an emotional disarray, and I'm not exactly sure what I said to, was it Johnny Hale or William Ross?
Yes.
That night was kind of blurry afterwards.
Tell Judge Williams what you shot your mother with.
The same weapon.
All right. And didn't you stand over her and reload the weapon with a clip before you shot her?
No, it was one clip.
You recall after this happened, do you recall at some speaking to police officers in the state of Oklahoma?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall telling them that your mom couldn't go on living without your dad? She loved him too much. I put a clip in the gun and I shot her.
I did not recall that.
Tell Judge Williams how you ended up in Oklahoma after you killed both of your parents.
I took the family car and drove there.
Did you drive straight from here to Oklahoma?
No, I drove to Mexico.
And you crossed the border down in Laredo, Texas, over into Mexico, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do with that 9mm rifle that you had killed your parents with?
I hid it behind a dumpster in Laredo.
Your Honor, may I object?
Sure.
I want to start off by saying, one, that Mr. Walker from the time has always admitted his guilt. He pled guilty. He took what turned out to be the maximum sentence for this offense because subsequent to his plea.
What's your state your objection, and then you can explain it.
Oh, okay.
We need to know
My
what we're-
objection is the serious nature of the offense is already in the record, and it is not a basis for denying the expungement. So I don't
So
understand.
you're saying that a judge should not take into consideration the nature of the underlying crime or what should I take into consideration then?
Well, you should take it into
I know
consideration.
nothing about this, which is good for everybody, probably. You know?
No, I don't mind that he's getting some of the information out, but he's actually putting the defendant through an attempt to say that this crime is so significant that there is no way he should get an expungement.
That's exactly right. I agree. You're exactly right.
And it's particularly clear.
Is that an inappropriate argument, Mr. April?
Yes, because in the statute, there are 4 different ways in which you can get an expungement. 3 of them are limited to Class D felonies of a certain caliber or the equivalent of them. The only one that doesn't have a limitation on the nature of the felony is the one we're talking about here. When you look,
Or we wouldn't be here, right? Or we wouldn't be here if we were talking about Class D. Obviously, we're operating under that. So,
but I'm saying that the legislature did not say we can only give pardons to people who do Class D through B, but we can't give them for A or capital offenses. They made it clear that it doesn't matter what offense you committed, including capital murder, if you have a pardon. So I don't understand why.
we all agree with that. What should testimony be limited to in this case? Then you just think that, wait, let me finish. You think testimony should only be limited to positive things or that have happened since this date for the last 16 years? What about someone that, and I'm not equating this together, but what about somebody that participated in 9/11 and they came before me for an expungement? I should know about what they'd done, what it involved. I mean, this gentleman has never denied what he's done. He's taken responsibility for what he's done. So I don't. The thing I'm having, I don't know the parameters. That's the reason I didn't use the clear and convincing evidence of what, that he should or should not have an expungement. So I want to listen to everything here. I will assure you that nothing I hear here will shock you. At this point in my life and the kind of cases I've had, nothing's going to shock me, and I'll just have to make a decision within my sound discretion. If you think I've abused my discretion one way or the other, either one of you can appeal it. So let's just proceed. I think I understand, Mr. Wright. If you bring testimony in about what happened in this case by these other officers, you can do that, but let's just proceed. And I understand, I think you've covered the crime of the father. I don't think you've gotten to the mother. Let's quickly talk about the mother if you want to, and if you don't, we can move on, okay?
Okay, Judge, I'll do that. I have just a couple more questions I want to cover with Mr. Walker. One, do you know how many times you shot your mother?
I do not. I had one clip, and after I shot my father, she was in the room with him, and she jumped up, she started screaming, and I emptied the clip. I'm not sure how many times I shot her.
Now, after you shot them, I know that you've testified and you've told Judge Williams about going down to Laredo, Texas, and over into Mexico, then back up to Oklahoma. But before you took off in the family car to head out of state and out of country, where did you go before you did that after you shot both of your parents?
Well, I had a good friend, Johnny Hale, and he was working at Sonic, and I was in a panic. And anytime I needed advice, because he was a year older and he was going through stuff himself in his life, I would go to him for advice. and I was scared. I didn't know what to do. So I went to him and I told him, and he didn't believe me at first. And he said, well, we should go get William Runner because he carried himself as somebody that was very knowledgeable in the world. And so they said, we don't believe you. We would like to help, but we don't believe you. And we want to see proof. And so we went back to my house and they saw my parents and they said, here, take the money in our wallets, take what we got. You need to go and run to Mexico and live a life. And so that's what I did. I took advice from two of my friends who were older. It was bad advice, but I was in such a state of panic, I really didn't know what to do.
You brought them over to show them your parents' bodies that you had killed.
Yes, sir.
Now, the only other thing I want to ask is, I know there's been a lot of talk about accomplishments that you've made after the fact, rehabilitation. Yes, you've had athletic awards, acting positions in prison, correct?
Yes, sir.
But prior to this murder, you were accomplished even before you killed your parents, correct? You were in the Scouts?
Yeah.
You were in the Scouts?
Yes, sir. I was in the Boy Scouts.
You attained the rank of Eagle Scout. Just about.
Life.
Excuse me?
I was a Life Scout. I never attained Eagle.
And you attained that just a few months before this happened.
Yes, sir.
Judge, that's the questions I have at this time for Mr. Walker.
Do you have any redirect, Mr. April?
Yes, Mr. Walker, did I understand you correctly that you are saying that you want the expungement so that you can get through the door in any of these situations you talked about before?
Yes, sir. I believe.
Is that right?
I believe that this on my record will stop me from getting a lot of jobs. So it will stop me at the door. But once I get in the door with an application and I am freely able to speak to somebody and talk to somebody, then yes, I am more than willing to share my history, and I would never hide it if anybody ever talked about it. And I will even bring it up to people sometimes that I do not need to, because I feel like this is a part of me, and I will continue to carry my parents' legacy with me, and everything I do from this day forward reflects upon their legacy as much as mine.
So you believe that, is it correct that you believe that if someone sees this record, whether it's somebody who's where you're applying for a coaching job, whether it's trying to get a loan, anything like that, you will not get that opportunity for a face-to-face discussion with a potential employer, a potential bank person, etc.
Yes, sir. I do believe that. I do believe that. And as Mr. Wright said, they will not have a full picture of me if all they see is that on a piece of paper.
I have no further questions.
Okay. Before you call your next witness, I want to ask y'all to do this in case I forget it, but listen to all these others. I really don't know what are on most applications. I know some states don't check the box on whether you've been convicted of a felony or not. I know that when we swear jurors in, we always inquire of them if they've been convicted and not pardoned by someone who has the authority to do that. I know that this is Mr. Walker's belief, and I have no doubt that he believes that, but I don't know under what circumstances people have to disclose on loan applications and that sort of thing. I mean, on loan applications, for example, have you been involved in convicted of a felony or pled guilty to a felony that has to do with moral turpitude, or are there just usually questions on whether you're a convicted felon? And if you're pardoned, you have to answer those. I don't know those. So at some time, Mr. April, maybe you and Mr. Wright could educate me. I'm not going to make this decision today. I'm going to listen to all the testimony and read some more. So if y'all could provide me with a little information on that would be helpful. Mr. April, you want to call your next witness?
Could I just say one thing in response to what you just
Sure.
told us?
Sure.
You have to understand there's no guarantee that somebody like Blake Walker is going to live only in Kentucky for the rest of his life. So
I didn't ask you to limit that to
yeah,
Kentucky.
so I'm saying I can't tell you, we won't be able to tell you how it is everywhere because it varies from state to
Looking,
state.
well, I know.
I understand. I just
You know,
want
I don't know. You could say 15 states do this and 20 don't. And that's right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what limitation. I know he feels like, obviously it's some limitation.
Well, I did quote to you from that in the memo, all of the different things that require background checks across the country.
Yeah, I saw that.
All right, but I will do what you want, of course.
Yeah, go ahead. You can call your next witness.
I would like to call Alex Kramer.
Alex Kramer. Okay, Alex Kramer.
Is he on?
Yeah, Alex, will you raise your right hand, please, Alex?
Yes, sir.
Swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Okay, you may inquire, Mr. April.
Please state your full name
Alex Kramer.
and where do you reside?
Reside in Louisville, Kentucky.
What's your address?
1603 Nighthawk Court, 40223.
And what is your employment, sir?
I am the Vice President of Prudential Heating and Air Conditioning Company.
I would like you to answer my question with the knowledge that Judge Williams has already read your letter. But I would like briefly for you to explain how you came to hire Blake Walker and how you dealt with the situation.
Sure. About like a little over 12 months ago, we got a call from Jim Peterson, a good friend of ours and customer, who basically just said, you know, I know you guys are always looking to hire some new people. Definitely have a guy that I want you to interview. Kind of briefly told us, you know, the story. Hey, he has a background. He was convicted of murder. Told us a little bit about the pardon, things like that, and basically just asked, would we be willing just to sit down with Blake and, you know, talk to him in an interview.
Did you have any reluctance?
I did. At first, I definitely, the initial reaction was, you know, to throw the hands up and say, you know, I don't necessarily want to get involved with that. There was definitely some high emotions, things like that. But after a little more conversation, like I said, agreed to, you know, just to start with an interview and go from there.
And what happened as a result of the interview?
Blake came in, we had the interview, him and I had a great conversation, probably talked for a good, probably 30, 45 minutes, something like that. Had a really good feeling for him and offered Blake a position with us.
And how has he worked out as an employee?
Blake's been a phenomenal employee. Like I said in my letter, he's been what I would describe as a model employee. He's here on time, has a great attitude. The crew he is on has gotten exemplary marks from customers, everything like that. And a guy that, we're extremely excited about the future and the way he's growing and learning.
Would you say that your reluctance about hiring a person with a felony conviction, do you have a reluctance before you met Blake, did you have a reluctance to hire someone who had any felony conviction?
Sure, definitely. I mean, that is always a checkbox. The judge brought up a great point. I'm not sure exactly what the precedent or law technically is on it, but we do have a checkbox on our application. Just, have you ever been convicted, felony, misdemeanor? And in the past, yes, has been a very concerning thing to us when one comes across with, with a felony on there.
Was the nature of, when you were told the nature of Blake's crimes, the killing of his mother and father, was that even more difficult for you?
Sure. It was extremely difficult. We talk a lot of times as a management team through applications. We have had, individuals with misdemeanors, things like that on their record before. And, a lot of times we talk about what was it, will they talk about it with us? Will they run through the scenario and overall, was it some petty theft or all the way up to, in this case, murder? So to answer your original question, yes, definitely the murder charge bothered me more so than normal.
Having had the success that you have just discussed about hiring Blake and how he's turned out so far as an employee, will you have more or the same kind of reluctance about others that come to you with felony convictions?
It's definitely opened my eyes to that, hearing the story, talking to the individual, really getting to know the person versus, I guess, just the conviction itself is definitely a big portion. So I would definitely think I would give people more of an opportunity in the future just to at least talk to me, explain the situation, and kind of get a feel for the individual.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Wright, would you like to inquire of this gentleman?
I had just maybe a couple of questions. Mr. Kramer, Brian Wright, it's nice to meet you. Is it fair to say that it was important to you in this case, and then also kind of as a second part, in future situations where you may hire somebody, to know the full background of the individual before you make a decision?
I want to make sure I understand the question fully. I don't want to say, can you rephrase it? Can you ask it again? I'm sorry.
Okay, let me try to work. Was it important to you to know the full background of Mr. Walker before you hired him?
Yes, sir. I definitely, that's one of the things I've always wanted to hear is, will the individual talk about it with me? Will they really explain the past, things like that?
And you indicate that's open to your eyes, maybe to giving more opportunities in the future to people you hire. And you're testifying, obviously, as a business person, as an employer, somebody that's hired Mr. Walker to work for you. In the future, if you were going to hire somebody, would it be important for you to know all of the background before you hired them, as opposed to finding out about it later?
Yes, sir. I would definitely want to know, and obviously when the application comes through, I guess that's the first line that we see. If they select yes on the application, that would be the first time I would see it. So I would definitely like to see that shown on that application. The checkbox yes and what had happened. Yes, sir.
So if they check yes, you would ask further questions, delve into it, get a little more background about it.
Yes, sir.
If they checked no, would you press them to see perhaps if there's something in their background that's been sealed, or do you erased, or you just take that no as an honest answer?
Yes, sir. We do. If they check no, we do run background checks, things like that. But if they do check no, It is not something I always do bring it up on an interview, just want to double check. You did check no, is that correct? And if they do say, yes, sir, that is correct, I've never been convicted, then we do move on.
Okay, that's all I have, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
April, you have anything else?
Yes, Mr. Kramer, after you talked to Blake, before you hired him, did you run a background check on him?
I'm not sure. Unfortunately, in this case, I don't know. I'll have to look back at our records.
Does it bother you as an employer that the law says that if a person has their criminal record expunged, that you would never have a chance to get a background check on them? Does that bother you?
No, not necessarily. That doesn't, it's not something that, I guess I'm a very, I don't want to say honest person, but I rely a lot on honesty out of guys, that we, have that good relationship. So no, it doesn't necessarily bother me, if I feel that they're being honest, in the no answer.
And it certainly, well, let's say that you were interviewing someone who had their record expunged, and in the course of talking to them, they revealed it to you at your face-to-face interview. Would that offend you at all?
That would bother me if it came to a question where when I was asking questions, it came up as far as that I felt they were trying to hide it. It extremely would bother me. If they were forthcoming with it, it would not bother me, but it definitely would bother me if I felt they were trying to hide it.
And of course, in Blake's case, you already knew when you met with him about the murders. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Hey, may this witness be excused?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer, you may be excused. Thank you for participating. You're welcome to stay on the line. This is a public hearing, or you can click yourself off and go about your business. Call your next witness, please.
Wayne Herner, please.
The last name is what?
Herner, Herner.
Wayne Herner. All right. Is Wayne Herner on here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you raise your right hand, please. You swear the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Proceed, Mr. April.
Please state your full name.
Dr. Wayne Herner.
And doctor, where do you reside?
I reside at 12703 Old Henry Road, Louisville, Kentucky.
And what is your present occupation?
I'm a forensic and clinical psychologist.
And what is your background and experience in that?
Well, I have a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and I have a postdoctoral master's degree in clinical psychopharmacology. I worked as a clinical director for Kentucky's Department of Juvenile Justice for a number of years before moving on to the Kentucky Department of Corrections, where I worked for many years, 15 years, retired from state government from the Kentucky Department of Corrections. I was the statewide director of psychological services for the DOC, and also the clinical director for the 110-bed psychiatric unit that we have within the Kentucky Department of Corrections. And I also maintain private practice where I do forensic evaluations for the court and for attorneys as an expert witness. And I've done that since 1990. So I've seen over 500 cases, criminal cases, ranging from capital murder to less offenses, both in juvenile, state, and federal courts. And I continue that practice currently.
And how long have you been?
Therapy.
I'm sorry, how long have you been in private practice?
Over 30 years.
Please tell us how you came to know Blake Walker.
I received a phone call from a psychologist that works within the Kentucky Department of Corrections, who I had worked with while I was with the DLC. And this person knew that I had maintained a private practice, an independent practice. And she gave me a call to see if I would be available to meet and work, I guess you want to say, with Mr. Walker, as he was, I think he just had received notice about the pardon. And I agreed to do that after she explained the situation, explained the case to me. And because I've worked with the most severe offenders over the years in a variety of capacities, from reentry to risk assessments, competency evaluations, criminal responsibility, so forth. And so I have the, unlike a lot of psychologists, because I do have a history within the criminal venues and understand sort of the dynamics that go on when a person is incarcerated and when they're scheduled to be released and when they're released, the challenges, demands that they meet. So I agreed to do that in this situation with Mr. Walker.
If you are at liberty to say, was the thrust of the referral that it would be wise if Blake Walker could have therapy to assist in the transition?
Yes.
And so after you got that referral, what kind of involvement did you then have with Mr. Walker?
Well, I began meeting with him on a weekly basis and met with his uncle and aunt, the Petersons, to get a better picture of the dynamics within this family and the dynamics, because it's important to understand when I've worked with offenders for many, many years, and I'm very skeptical on some of the promises that the inmates make, because when they come out, most of the time, yes, they've completely turned the corner. They found religion, everything is great in many cases, and so I understand a lot of the dynamics that are going on, and I can call them on it if I feel like it's exaggeration or minimization and so forth. And so I met with Blake and the people he was living with, his uncle and aunt, to get a fuller picture of what he was up against, where he was going to live, what his plans were, how he was doing. Gave me an opportunity to assess how he was adjusting, because the move from prison to the streets happened pretty quickly. And being a Vietnam War era individual, we know what it's like for people coming out of the jungles or out of very traumatic situations straight back to the streets, and how the adjustment can be very, very difficult oftentimes. And so we met on a weekly basis for a number of months, and that evolved to we're now meeting once a month.
And what kind of, now I didn't say this before, but obviously the judge has read your letter, so you don't have to cover everything, but
Sure.
Could you briefly summarize your, for lack of a better word, diagnosis of
Sure.
Blake and his adaptation to life outside of prison?
Certainly. And always taking a risk assessment in mind in these, or at least that's what I do in these situations. What type of dynamic factors are going on that would put a person at risk to reoffend or to wind up back in jail, because as we know, the recidivism rate in general, for every crime is about 66%. And that's every crime. And so meeting with him, I'm getting a psychosocial history. I'm constantly evaluating, is he working? Is he doing too much of this, not enough of that? What are the understanding the huge barriers that inmates face when they're released from prison, and how they're adjusting to that. I was surprised to find that Mr. Walker has a strong support network, continuing to work on other areas of interpersonal support, other family members that live further away and don't have the opportunity to meet with him, but he's making inroads with that, increasing his social network. In summary, he doesn't have any problems with addictions right now, which is a good thing. He has a support network. He's worked. If there's a negative, and we talk about this, is he's working too hard. 2 jobs, training dogs. Don't want him to overdo it. Take it slow. Sometimes the slower you go, the faster you get there. So he's always been genuine and honest, and this has been validated by comments made by his uncle and aunt. Everything, he's always been open for guidance and suggestion to think about this, take this into consideration. And he's done remarkably well. There's no signs of mental illness, depression, addictions. There's no evidence of a personality disorder. Not that I'm doing a risk assessment on him formally, but his primary issue would have been the static offense of his past criminal history that would go against him when it comes to a risk assessment. So he's doing everything that we would expect an inmate that we hope that inmates would do in a reformatory. They reform and they try to make better decisions. He wasn't constantly in trouble in prison. He was looking to make himself better. He didn't get involved in the pro-criminal element beyond just having to live with him for 15, 16 years. And so this is for me, as I mentioned in my letter, in my 30 years experience, this is one of the individuals that appears to be doing it right. And I've met with him for 11 months regularly. And as I say, the only knock against it would be he's probably trying too hard, working too hard. But other than that, he's I think this is what it was meant for.
Do you and Blake have a plan to continue to meet?
Well, I think in the near future, certainly we're going to continue working. Don't have a definite time frame. We haven't terminated. We're not doing this just for kicks and giggles. You know, this is he's been very open to recognizing that the adjustments coming out of prison are so tough. You know, to be able to use a new cell phone, to go through McDonald's, you know, it's everything changed while he was in prison. And so he's making these adjustments rapidly. He's intelligent. He's eager to learn. Continues to battle with the guilt that comes with the crime, the nature that he did. He'll never forget that. And so, at least as long as I'm able, like to be a resource for him in case things happen. You know, holidays are tough, and emotionally, the grieving still continues. So still be available for him for that, and to help him find resources if needed, but to be more of a support and a resource at that juncture, yes.
So with that guilt that you have observed, do you also have an opinion on remorse?
Oh, well, obviously it's just based on our talking and the behaviors he does. And I've dealt with many, many murderers and psychopaths. And Blake, as I mentioned, to me, he's genuine in his remorse, his guilt, and the shame for what he's done. And those are obstacles for anybody to have to battle in day-to-day living, much less all the barriers being an ex-felon.
So obviously, too, we have, with Blake has a very unique situation because his murder is within the family. How beneficial to him has the support of such close relatives and family members to his mother and father?
Well, this is critical in my experience. It's difficult enough to have a support network when a person leaves prison, but to continue to have support from caring family members, it's often a lifesaver, particularly if we feel like some inmates, some felons can rehabilitate, can make it. We don't have to just throw away the key on them, especially when they were teenagers at the time. There's a lot of development that goes on, and family support is been shown to be very critical in helping a person to manage and to continue to be a pro-social member of society.
With regard to when Blake went into prison, went into any form of confinement, and then grew up in prison, how do you think that impacted him?
And we've discussed that, because it's very easy for inmates to sort of fall into that culture. Yes, and become institutionalized and career criminals, and take on those values, that value system. Particularly when you're a young person, the brain's continuing to develop. Your adolescents are much more impulsive, less responsible, can't see full consequences. Blake's tenure in prison, at least from the information that was given to me from the DOC, was that sure, there were times when things went afoul. You can't avoid that when you're in prison. But he was not a chronic troublemaker, was not in segregation frequently, took advantage of resources that were available, reflected on his situation, thought about his future, although even though it was bleak in a lot of ways, he had no idea what was going to happen to him. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison in his early mind. And so, but he continued to work positively to better himself. And what that tells me is that he's got some courage to stand up to it, and he's got some gumption, so to speak, rather than just being a weak person that just sort of follows whoever's running the show.
did, I don't know, based on what you obtained from the Department of Corrections, did you make any, or were you able to ascertain whether as he grew older, he got even better in the way he handled himself? Or are you able to say that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that in general that he carried himself well. He had a lot of respect from staff. And that's what the psychologist that made the referral to me emphasized, that he respectful, responsible, not a chronic troublemaker. And she was very, very much for him to have his opportunities.
And I guess, lastly, I would like you to comment on, you made the point a moment ago that at age 16, his brain wasn't developed the same way. So he was in a position of impulse, he could be impulsive, etc. And of course, you have an opinion on when that maturation of the brain organically takes place?
Well, what we do know, and of course I've had to testify on this in court on during risk assessments and so forth, but for males particularly, our brains continue to develop until about age 24, mid-20s, unless they're being poisoned with substance abuse and trauma and so forth. But continuing to develop the neural pathways in order to make to have the brakes on our frontal lobe to be able to say stop, think, and then act, versus just being impulsive and adventure seeking and more aggressive and so forth. So not to all through his 20s, he was continuing to learn and to develop and practice, and probably prison was good in that respect because it put the structure on him and the guidance and said, this is where you have to, you can go this direction or you can go that direction, and helped him develop his break, so to speak.
So without doing an autopsy on Blake, is it very likely that the brain he has today is developed much more than it was at the time of the offense?
Oh, without question, yes.
And that in itself speaks to a very strong possibility with regard to a lack of impulsiveness that he had at 16?
Oh, certainly, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Wright, would you like to inquire?
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Herner, I don't have a lot of questions. I do have a few things. The first thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned in your testimony that during his 16, give or take, years of incarceration, 16, 17 years of incarceration, things ran afoul for Mr. Walker at times. What do you mean by that? What were you referring to?
Getting into arguments with other inmates, not anything that was serious, like bringing in contraband or stabbing other inmates. Just typical or expected types of run-ins that happen when you live with the same people in tight quarters 24/7. There were times where he probably didn't follow all the rules of the institution, but it was not a chronic problem.
How many infractions would you say he had while he was incarcerated?
I have no idea.
Multiple?
I have no idea.
All right. You indicate in your letter that you continue to meet with him and with his uncle and aunt on a regular basis. I think you testified maybe that was twice a month, now down to once a month. Is it important to you to meet not only just with Mr. Walker, but also with the family members?
To a point, yes.
And
that's why
have
I
you,
do occasionally meet with the Petersons.
all right. What about Blake Walker's brother, Manning? Have you had communication with him?
He lives, from what I understand, he lives on the other part of the country and still has some, still adjusting to this.
So he has not participated in counseling sessions with you or Blake Walker?
No, not with me.
Have you had any contact with Manning?
No.
And when you say he's having trouble adjusting to this, what do you mean by that?
Well, from talking with Blake, he's not, he's warming up to the idea. I think everything happened suddenly, and he's not quite ready to wrap his arms around his brother and establish a relationship like nothing happened.
His position is a little different than the aunt and uncle.
Yes, it appears to be.
In your report, you conclude by saying that expungement can only help him to combat challenges and barriers faced by inmates reentering society. Can you explain what you mean by that? How would expungement benefit him?
Well, I think as already been mentioned, there's so many barriers that face inmates when they're released. Oftentimes it's because of parole, oftentimes probation, and there's so many guidelines and checks and balances with different types of releases. And in my experience, and I think it's been put succinctly that, well, let me back up a little bit. When people reenter out of prison, there's a large emphasis on reentry right now from leaving prison, but I think it's smoke and mirrors because there's really not a whole lot that's really being done. It used to be you get a gray coat and $40 and a bus ticket. Now it's not much better than that. You know, they may try to help you get on Social Security or find some housing arrangement, and so they're met with these kinds of barriers. And just by having a history of a criminal history closes so many doors. And so I agree 100% that once a person, a lot of times, you know, if you get an application or if you get a housing thing and you have to, and they see, yes, you've had a felony or you have a criminal history, you're automatically disqualified. And so helping with the barriers, expungement is just one of those other steps that I think helps give a person a better opportunity. It doesn't wipe the chart clean or the record clean. It can still be found. It's still available in different ways, but it's just another one of those resources that's put in place to help. If it wasn't there, you know, I'd question why even have expungement, but it's there to be a helpful tool to help navigate life with as few occurrence as possible.
Essentially, it erases that from view, though. I mean, the criminal history, media coverage, sure, still available, but the criminal history is erased, correct?
Well, it's supposed to be, yes.
Now, in your report on the top of the second page, prior to working together, I became fully aware of Mr. Walker's criminal history and details of his history. I take it that was important to you, if not only that you did it, but you also included that as a paragraph to itself in this short letter you wrote in support of this expungement.
Well, certainly, because expungement's it's a serious matter. And for me to be able to go to bat for somebody, number one, just writing a recommendation. I typically, I wouldn't do that unless I felt it was valid. And so I think it's important that I'm not coming in this blind and just saying, oh, he's a good guy. And what I see once an hour, 4 times a week or whatever, and just base it on that. You know, I'm a forensic psychologist, so I try to get as many details as available before I make a thoughtful decision.
And I think that's a good position for you to take. And it was important.
Objection. We need a question, not testimony. I think that's a good position for you to take.
Well, he didn't finish his sentence. It might have been a question there. Maybe setting the predicate. Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
Do you think that's an important position for you to take, Doctor?
To what? Say that I'm aware of detail?
To be aware of a person's criminal history.
If I'm doing therapy with them, certainly.
Yes. And a future therapist that might see him, might take over this after you, it would be important for that therapist, just like it is to you, to know the criminal history of the individual, correct?
And that's why we have medical records.
And criminal records.
Therapy notes.
And criminal records.
If a lot of times, well, you know, it's records, it's data. If you're doing therapy, it's important to have information.
As much as possible.
Well, certainly.
Okay. That's all I have, Judge. Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. April, you want any redirect? You ready for next witness?
I'll redirect briefly.
Okay.
When you were talking about just now on cross-examination, when you were talking about the need for records, you were referring in that case as a therapist to the records of any previous therapist? Is that correct?
Well, it's not always done, but there are times when if a person's handing off a therapy case, then they can request records, medical records to help support. Not always done. Every record isn't requested. School records aren't requested oftentimes for therapy. Criminal history isn't always requested. Many times there's no, depending on the therapist, there's no records that are ever requested. You just meet with a person and you develop your relationship and you get your history in order to deal with whatever concerns a person brings to the table. It's not like a forensic evaluation or if they're doing a diagnostic evaluation for certain purposes. But in my practice, I like having information.
Well, let's say you had a patient that you were dealing with as a therapist, and that person, doesn't matter what the crime was, had an expungement. So there was no I take it you don't even run background checks, do you?
No.
You don't run background checks. So if you got to wondering if the person was telling you the truth about that, would you, what would you do? Would you go, you say you don't do a background check, so would you Google them, that sort of thing?
You know, it depends on the situation. I might Google them if I was just curious. But again, I deal with the criminal population oftentimes, and so they're often in Google. Yeah. They're on the news. I have a lot of high profile cases I work with. But if it was just a regular therapy person that's not a, probably wouldn't Google them. And I probably would just challenge them through therapy. I wouldn't go try to prove they're wrong or find other data that might contradict what they're saying, because that's not the way therapy goes oftentimes.
So basically, you wouldn't be at a disadvantage in therapy because a person's record had been expunged?
No, I do disability evaluations. I do school evaluations over the years. And a lot of times we don't have those records, and we still able to come up with accurate diagnoses, accurate issues to work on based on what they're bringing to us and so forth. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times there are no records available, and that works fine.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Can this witness be excused?
Judge, can I follow up with one question for Dr.
Sure.
Dr. Herner, if Mr. Walker began seeking treatment or counseling from another professional and they requested your records, would you think it would be important to provide all of your records to that subsequent counselor?
It would be whatever they requested that I had, which would be their therapy notes.
Right. If you had references in those notes to the fact that he had killed his parents previously, been charged and convicted, spent time in prison, would you think it would be important to include that, or would you take that out before you sent the records to the subsequent counselor?
No, I wouldn't take anything out of my notes.
Why is that?
Because I feel like anything I put in my notes is important.
All right. That's all I had. Just thank you.
Well, Your Honor, I haven't redirect, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Doctor, when you pass on your therapy notes, is there a patient-doctor confidentiality involved there?
Yes, there is.
And when you pass that on, you're not passing it on to the world.
Correct.
And the person you pass it on to, the next therapist, can't release it to the world, can they?
No.
And they can only do that with a legitimate HIPAA release from the patient. Is that right?
That's correct.
So this situation isn't like an employer
No.
and an employee relationship.
No.
It's not like a school hiring somebody and what they learn.
No, it's not.
All right. I have no further questions.
Okay, may this witness be excused?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Your Honor.
Okay, thank you for your participation. You're welcome to stay on the line, or you may be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next witness.
Your Honor, I would like to call Rob Peterson.
Okay, Bob Peterson.
Rob.
Rob, raise your right hand, Mr. Peterson. You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do, so help my God.
Okay.
Please
Proceed.
state your full name
Robert Allen Peterson Jr.
and where do you reside?
In Louisville, Kentucky at 802 Creetown Court, 40243.
And what is your occupation?
I'm retired builder and remodeler, currently a chainsaw carver.
What is your present relationship with Blake Walker, as well as your wife's relationship?
Okay, well, we have a very good relationship with Blake. Blake, of course, is my nephew. He took the life of my sister, Barbara, and brother-in-law, Brian. But we have a very, very good relationship with Blake, which we developed before the incident occurred, as well as through his years in prison and through this last year. Blake is living with us in our home, and we are very grateful that he's here.
Does he pay rent?
Yes, he does.
Can you briefly tell us how you and your wife related over the years that Blake was in prison? What kind of communications did you have with him?
Yes. We started visiting Blake early on, at as early as the time of the crime, and also as the court case progressed up to the time of his plea agreement. We visited him through at the youth detention center in Columbia when he was there. And then over the years, we visited Blake every 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the occasion, at various prisons in Kentucky. We have gone to half a dozen prisons to visit him. And then we also had frequent phone calls, where he would call us. And we did have some writing correspondence, but we neither one of us were as good about writing all the time, but we did keep in close contact with Blake. And our relationship developed over a long period of time.
So you and many members of Blake's family, your family, all supported the commutation to allow Blake, for the governor to allow Blake to leave prison as a result of the time he had already served. Is that right?
That's correct. Both my mother supported Blake very strongly, my wife Sharon, myself, our daughter Marie, Blake's grandmother on his father's side, Iva Walker. We have 2 aunts that visited Blake regularly, Joy Peterson and Pat Peterson. Both were regular visitors with Blake at the prison, and we would often have one of the aunts accompany us when we visited. And then Jim Peterson, my first cousin, actually Joy Peterson's son, and his wife Deb became regular visitors with Blake's starting in about 2016.
You heard mention earlier in this proceedings about Blake's brother. Did Blake's brother oppose in any way the commutation application?
When we presented a commutation application in 2015 to then Governor Beshear, we notified Blake that this action was being taken. I'm sorry, we notified Manning that this action was being taken so that he would not be blindsided by that through media or any other potential source. We wanted him to be aware of what was going on. He was living in Oregon at that time. At the time, his reaction appeared to be that he was somewhat neutral on it. He told us that he would not fight the application, nor was he inclined to strongly support it. Then in 2019, when we resubmitted the application with Governor Matt Bevin, we also informed Manning at the time. We had actually visited him too, but we told him what was happening, and he seemed to be, he didn't object, and he seemed to be more favorable toward it, but he was not a strong supporter.
So during the time, I want you to realize, as I've said to other witnesses, that we're not going to cover all of your letter because the judge has read that. But could you just briefly introduce your wife who's on camera?
Yes, my wife Sharon Peterson is here with me, and she was actually very instrumental in my movement from, at the time of the crime, from shock and dismay and complete confusion as to what I should do, he was starting to realize that Blake, as a young man, deserved a chance. And when I was able to forgive him in my heart and tell Blake that I did, it literally was life-changing for me. And there's no question in my mind that we did the right thing. And since becoming more deeply involved in his life, we have just been rewarded with confirmation that we did the right thing.
And do you believe that based on everything that Blake has done since this horrible incident, this tragedy, that he has done enough to warrant what he received, the commutation, the pardon, and now to obtain an expungement of his criminal history?
Yes, I do. When we submitted the application for commutation, we never dreamed of asking for a pardon. When a pardon was granted, it became very clear to us what a wonderful move that was by Governor Bevin. He understood much better the challenges that Blake would face in his life after prison. And by granting a pardon, he was able to give Blake much more opportunity to be successful in life and to remove some barriers. With the expungement, we feel like it will remove many more barriers that he will face as life progresses, as has been noted here today.
As I will not be calling every family member, I would like to ask you, because of what the prosecutor brought up earlier, what do you and your wife have any involvement with Matt Bevin before the commutation and pardon were issued?
I know Sharon did not. I had a brief meeting at the Home Builders Association of Louisville, where Matt Bevin came and spoke to our board of directors. I'm a past president of the Home Builders Association, the BIA in Louisville. I did have a chance to talk to him briefly and just introduce myself, but that's as far as it went.
You didn't talk about any gubernatorial action, clemency action at that time?
At that time, I did tell him that I had a nephew that was in prison, and I asked him what he thought about a person's chance for redemption. And he spoke and said that he felt very highly that redemption was something that everyone should have a chance for, and that he believed in it. Other than that, we didn't have any discussion about any specifics or his name or anything of that nature.
And it was mentioned that Governor Bevin called you?
Yes, Governor Bevin called us on Friday night in December, the Friday before the inauguration of the new governor. He called us about 10:30 at night. We'd gotten in, phone registered a private number, and we almost didn't answer it, thinking it was, some sort of hoax or prank call or sales call. Picked it up, and we were stunned that it was Matt Bevin. We spoke, Blake said we spoke for about 30 minutes. I think it was a little shorter than that. I think we spoke more like 20 minutes or so with him. I called my wife on the phone, and he interviewed us about his commutation for about 20 minutes.
And did you feel from the questions that he asked that he had already read the commutation application?
I was stunned. He actually asked questions that were very detailed. It was very obvious that he had read the package thoroughly, and there's over 100 pages in the packet. We were incredibly impressed how well informed he was when he made his call to us.
And I find this embarrassing to even say, but Matt Bevin did not request any quid pro quo, anything in return, suggest that this commutation could be bought.
Oh, no. Now, the only political contributions that I've ever made were through the Home Builders Build Pack, where you buy a raffle ticket once a year and that's it.
And to your knowledge, after I asked for you to check if anybody in the family had donated to Matt Bevan, did you do that?
Yes, no one ever came forward to say that they donated to him. Matter of fact, most of the family was more likely to donate to his opposition.
Do you think, what was your prior occupation?
I was a home builder and remodeler.
Did you have experience in background checks on people that came that sought employment with you?
I really did not. I was a very small volume builder. I had a few people work for me over the years that were at first were summer employment for some young people we knew through church. And then the other two people who worked for me, one was recommended by a people I did work for. And then the other person was a church member that we knew very well. So I did not have occasion to do background check.
Is there, knowing what you said in your letter, which was signed by your wife as well, is there anything else that you would like to say to Judge Williams in support of Blake's expungement request?
Yes. My view is that far too many people are judged by the crime they committed. They are not being judged today by parole boards or by people that they encounter in society by what they have become. And I have every confidence that Blake has become a very fine young man and will continue only to grow as a responsible citizen, as a very outstanding member of society. I have the utmost confidence that he will do well in the years ahead. I have no worries at all about any type of fallback in his actions or character.
And do you think the expungement will help him?
Yes, and I think for the reasons that he stated, I think the idea of when he has children of being involved in their activities. I helped coach my daughter's sports teams. I did a lot of things that he wants to be able to do. And I feel like that absolutely will open doors to him. And I know from the fact that he has been totally honest with us, totally honest with the people that he has met, anyone that he's encountered, once he's met with them face to face, he's always come forward and talked about what he did. And people are very accepting of him once he has that opportunity.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, Mr. Wright.
Judge, Mr. Peterson, it's good to see you and speak with you. I know we've had conversations in the past, and I appreciate those. A couple of questions I have today. I know you indicated that Manning had been relatively neutral, I think was your word, or maybe Mr. April asked that and you agreed with it. Has he and Blake had communications in the past year?
They've had some communications. They have friended each other on Facebook. They have done some texting. They have not had the opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting because of the pandemic. Their process is growing. Their relationship is growing, but it's going to take time to come to a full relationship.
So when you said, I think I tried to write down the quote. When you said many family members all supported this, Manning, who is the only surviving child other than Blake of the two victims, he was not in full support of this, correct?
I don't think that's entirely correct. I would say that he was in the first time a commutation attempt was made, he was much more neutral about it then. The second time, when we called him and told him that Blake received the commutation and pardon, he said that he was okay with the commutation. He said he was unsure in his mind about the pardon. I don't think he fully understood what that meant.
But that was a conversation you had after the fact.
That is correct.
He never expressed support of that prior to.
He did not come forward and express support, nor did he come forward and express being against it.
Mr. April went to great lengths to explore any relationship with Matt Bevan. Do you know Jerry Miller?
Yes, I do know Jerry Miller.
And who is he?
He is one of our state representatives. He attended church where we went to church, and I also did remodeling work for him and his wife.
Did you call upon him to assist you with this commutation application?
Yes. What we did, I contacted Jerry Miller, told him that we were attempting a commutation attempt on behalf, or a nephew was attempting a commutation attempt. And we asked him just simply to ask that if he had any way of letting the commutation package be read, we thought that would be very helpful. And we did not ask for any special favors other than, please, if you have any way of asking Bevan's counsel, if they would read the application, we would much appreciate it. That's all we asked for.
And why specifically did you ask Representative Miller for that assistance?
Well, the reason I did, and I also will disclose that I asked Jason Nemus the same request. I knew him from church also. The reason I did is because 5 years ago, when the application went to Governor Stephen Beshear, we don't feel like, we never heard anything. We don't know if it got any kind of read. We have no idea how it was treated. And we didn't want some clerk somewhere to look at this and see this guy committed a double homicide and just totally discard the application. So we thought that there's something more merit to this case than just the commutation for this crime, that we wanted it to be seen and read. So we just requested that if they could suggest to the council to at least take a look at the application, we would much appreciate it. That's all we do.
And you felt like by virtue of their positions as state representatives, they would have a better opportunity to get that done than someone else?
Obviously, yes.
And they did?
As far as I know, they both said that they did make a phone call, and how much influence that had, we really don't know. Representative Miller even wrote a letter, didn't he? I'm not aware of him writing a letter. He may have, but I'm not aware of it.
Brian, are you finished?
I'm going to try to do one thing.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
You see that letter, Mr. Peterson?
I see it. Yes, give me a chance to read it. First time I've seen it.
All right.
Yeah, he meant to say Mr. Walker instead of Mr. Peterson on there.
Yeah, he got the defendant's name wrong, but he mentioned that he was longtime friends of you and your wife.
Yes, that's true. I have actually shared my testimony about my act of forgiveness with Blake and what it meant in my life with my congregation.
You didn't ask any other members of the congregation to speak with Governor Bevan, other than Representative Miller and Representative Nemus? That's correct. All right, that's all I have, Your Honor. That's all the questions I have, Judge. Thank you.
Okay, do you have anything else, Mr. April?
Yes, just briefly. Mr. Peterson, is it true, as you seem to indicate, that we could never find any action taken by Governor Bashir on the 2015 application?
Yes,
And in fact, we checked, at your request, I checked the Secretary of State's records, and we could find nothing for you on that application.
yes, I believe that's correct.
And although Judge Williams has now a copy of our entire commutation, gubernatorial commutation package in 2019, do you remember or are you aware that we disclosed, in fact, we had to disclose that we had previously made an application in 2015 to the governor then?
Yes, and matter of fact, a number of the letters that were transferred over still had Governor Bashir's name in the address section.
Do you know of any reason why an individual, a citizen of Kentucky, can't go and request assistance from his or her representative in the state legislature?
No, my understanding is that's why we have state representatives, and that's why they were at the time, they're in our district, or Jerry Miller had been a Metro Louisville councilman in our district. The statewide representative districts are a little different, but that's my understanding. That's why we have representatives. They are representatives.
And neither of these legislators told you that they could not ethically or legally make any kind of request like that for you?
No,
And they acted in accordance with your request, but that was it?
that's correct.
I have no further questions.
Okay, well, this witness may be excused. You want to call
Judge,
your
I do, Judge, since they brought up the application, again, I would like to ask Mr. Peterson one question about that application.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson, in that application to Governor Bevin, did you provide contact information for Manning Walker to the governor's office?
I don't think we did. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I don't know.
I don't recall seeing it in there either. That's why.
It wasn't in my letter. I don't know. I don't remember if it was in the packet or not.
That's all I had, Judge.
Okay. This witness.
Your Honor, I would just like to point out now that you have a copy of the application in the package that I have filed, and you will see that there is no requirement that you have to list all of the people related to or friends of the person you're seeking the application for. So there was no.
You have your next witness?
Your Honor, in view of you accepting the letters, I'm more than willing.
I'm accepting your entire filing for what they're worth.
Oh, I'm sorry. The statute specifically says you can consider not only testimony, but other matter.
I am accepting everything you forwarded to me.
Okay.
File the application for, that was filed initially, and anything that predates it was attached to it. I have no reason to believe that it was fraudulent or anything, or that you've added anything to it. I mean,
If I'm willing to not call my remaining witnesses unless you just want them to briefly say that they did author and they stand behind the letters.
well, you can just go down through them if you want to. Just call them and ask them that one question.
Okay.
I don't think Mr. Wright will object to that, will you, Mr. Wright?
No, Judge, and I do not question the authenticity of any letter.
So he will stipulate the authenticity of the letter for what they're worth. Is that correct, Mr. Wright?
That is correct, Judge.
Okay, now who's your next witness, Mr. April?
Then I would not call any other witnesses.
Okay, he announces closed. You You have witnesses, Mr. Wright, that you would like to call?
Judge, I have two witnesses here. Detective Underwood, I would propose to call unless the court would want me to submit a copy of the Kentucky State Police case report and or the PSI in this case. Otherwise, I would call Detective Underwood. And I don't care to tender that for the court to give you.
Well, I will accept a tender of both of those. And does Mr. April have those documents?
No.
I don't know.
Well, I would think that I'll allow you to tender them, but if you do tender them, I will probably have to give him an opportunity to respond to anything on there that he might find not truthful or inaccurate. You know, I deal with pre-sentence investigation reports all the time and police reports, and sometimes the pre-sentence investigation reports are really good and sometimes they're questionable, depends upon who the person that does them is. But I think that you have absolute right to submit them, but I'm going to give him an absolute right to respond or call a witness if you do.
And
Go ahead.
of course, I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
And of course, I would need to have them submitted, served on me.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's going to have to submit them to you, allow you to review them in case you wanted to cross-examine anyone. Now, he stipulated to these other letters, but these other letters have more to do with emotion and feelings than they do factual assertions, I think. So, but if there are things in there, so I'll let you serve them on Mr. April, and then he'll have a reserve the right for us to get back together because the only people that have to be involved in this hearing, although it's publicly accessible, would be Mr. April, the petitioner, and you and me, and any witness that he wanted to call. Okay? Okay, you want to call your first witness?
I'll call Ricky Underwood, Judge.
Officer Underwood, are you still on here with us?
Yes.
There you are. Okay. You raise your right hand. Swear the testimony you're about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Officer Underwood, for the record, would you state your name?
Ricky Underwood.
And Officer Underwood, how is it that you are employed at this time? What do you do?
I'm working at a school as a school resource officer for Taylor County School Police Department.
All right. You have spent a total of how many years in law enforcement?
Over 35.
And with regard to your time with the Kentucky State Police, could you tell the court when you started with the state police and the positions or ranks that you held until your retirement?
I started with the Kentucky State Police in July of 1989, and I've held the position of trooper first class, detective. I was a detective for 10 years at the Columbia Post, and then went to special operations as a canine handler and retired from there.
You have, since your retirement, worked with the Taylor County Sheriff's Department and now with the Taylor County Police Department in the school system. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Were you the detective assigned as the lead investigator into the deaths of Brian Walker and Barbara Peterson?
I was.
And for the record, I'm going to ask to give some background so this court is familiar with that. Can you tell the court the date and approximate time when you were notified, and in relation to that, the date and approximate time when these crimes occurred?
The date that I was notified was on 12/9 of 2002 at approximately 1100 hours.
And can you tell the court in Adair County, where did you go to observe the crime scene in this case?
It's approximately 17 miles from the courthouse in Columbia. It's in the area of a Nifley community. It's 17 miles from the courthouse to that residence.
Is this, would it be considered a rural part of the county?
Yes. It's a small community of the eastern part of the county.
Would you tell the court, and I'm just going to ask you now to tell the court a little bit about the crime scene, your investigation, and ultimately what you determined had happened in this case?
So basically, when we arrived on the scene, we were notified that there had 2 witnesses at the post area, giving them information that this crime had been committed, and we were en route with troopers and also first responders, ambulance, because we didn't know what we had. We arrived on the scene to find a 2-story house, and then once we made entry into the house, we found that it contained 2 victims both had been shot, lying in the lower part of the lower section of the house, which is looked like to be the living area.
Did you were on the this proceeding when Mr. Walker testified earlier in response to my questions as to how the 2 individuals were shot, the 2 victims were killed, based on your other officers' interviews with the 2 witnesses, Mr. Hale and Mr. Runner, as well as officers in Oklahoma that spoke with Mr. Walker. Was that your understanding of these crimes, how they were committed?
He gave a pretty good description of actually how the evidence stated, or how the evidence was shown at the crime scene. Also, the witnesses had described. The male victim had been shot from a distance, and 1 shell casing was recovered in what was described as Blake's room, from where he shot the first shot. And he was shot in the back of the head, and then was lying face up on a chair when the chair fell backwards in the floor. The female victim was on the couch, hunkered down, face down on the couch, and looked like she had been shot several times. And later we determined that she had been shot 7 times, 3 in the face and 4 rest in the torso, upper torso, with the same weapon.
Okay, I may have interrupted you, but 3 shots to the face and 4 to the upper torso?
Yes, correct.
Was the 9mm rifle that was used in this case, was it ever recovered?
No, it was not. The only thing was recovered was shell casings and lead from the scene.
Were those items consistent with the crime having been committed and the murders having been committed by a 9mm rifle?
Yes.
Do you know the approximate distance from Mr. Walker's father, where Brian Walker was killed, from where Blake was at when he fired the shot? How far away was he? You say he's in his bedroom and he was in the outer room, the victim was. What was the distance?
It was approximately 10 feet.
And
from where he was sitting to where the victim was.
As far as the range or the distance from his mother that he was when he shot and killed her, shot her the 7 times and killed her, what distance were those shots fired from based on your investigation?
They was determined to be at close range. From close, I mean from anywhere from 4 feet in to close contact.
Did Mr. Walker testified, and did your investigation confirm that he did travel from Adair County south to the Texas-Mexico border into the area of Laredo, Texas?
That's correct. We also had tracking on the credit cards that we had determined that were missing from the scene. And we had verifications on places where he was trying to attempt to use the credit cards, and had notified the authorities that he was attempting to cross the border, and was, by his own testimony, that he did go across to Mexico and back.
And then how was it that he came to be apprehended, if you recall, in Oklahoma?
From my understanding, I spoke with investigators out there, and they just got a call about a person sleeping in the vehicle, and when they approached him and woke him up and then got him out. He gave them a false name to start with, but then he tried to run and was apprehended. Once he was apprehended, they ran the vehicle, checked it. It came back as having a hit on it, and then he told them who he was, really, his real name.
Did do you know how many days after December the 9th, when you went out there at 11 o'clock in the morning, how many days later before he was apprehended in Oklahoma?
Not real sure without looking at the case report, several days.
According to the Oklahoma report that I have, it shows
Asked and answered. If you're, this is Mr. Wright testifying. I'm sorry. He said he didn't know. And now we're asking Mr. Wright to tell us the answer. I'm objecting.
Judge, you're muted.
I was agreeing with you, Mr. April. I didn't know you couldn't hear me. I just told Mr. Wright to move on, but I was muted.
I couldn't.
So I understand that he was gone for several days, and that the officer doesn't remember with any particularity without looking at the file. He can refresh his memory if you like from the file, but I would suggest we move on. I get the point.
All right, Judge. Officer Underwood, you spent about 35 years in law enforcement, and what would be your opinion about whether this expungement motion should be granted as the investigating officer in this case?
Well, my opinion is I don't think, by the short period of time that he served, that he would really deserve expungement, especially a crime, with two people being, their lives being taken the way they were.
Judge, that's the questions then that I have for Detective Underwood. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. April, you may inquire.
Mr. Underwood, did you stay on the case through the trial?
Through the trial?
Mm-hmm. Well, the guilty plea.
I was assigned to the case, yes, but I didn't come to the hearings, no.
You didn't. Well, did you talk with Mr. Wright about the decision on how to settle the case? Did he ask for your input?
Yes.
And you, at the time, understood that Mr. Wright had at least stated that he was going to seek the death penalty?
Yes.
And did Mr. Wright ask you for your opinion on the settlement?
Yes.
And did you agree with the prosecution's offer of life without parole for 25 years?
I did.
So despite what you think about this crime, you didn't think it deserved the death penalty. You didn't think it deserved life without parole. Is that right?
I did life without parole, yes.
No, the offer was life without parole, eligibility for 25 years. That was the offer. And that's what Mr. Walker took. Now, did you agree with that?
Yes.
All right. So you understand that Blake Walker served before the governor commuted his sentence over 16 years of the 25. So he was 16 and a half. He was like I'm sorry, it's even longer than that. He was like 7 or 8 years away from being eligible for parole. Did you understand that?
Yes.
So how many cases have you been involved in where the death penalty was sought?
Over my career, several.
And were there cases where the death penalty, that you worked where the death penalty was imposed? Where they actually got the death penalty?
No, I don't think so.
And in those cases, were you satisfied with that, how they were settled?
Yes, I've never had one that's been early released. Most of them serve their time.
What do you mean by early release? Paroled?
Paroled early, yes.
No.
I'm
question
not,
is,
I mean,
early parole. This was not a parole.
right,
This was the commutation by the governor to the time already served.
yes.
Okay. So are you saying that none of the cases you've had have ever, those people have ever been paroled?
I'm sure there's some of us been paroled, but not been, released early by the governor, been pardoned by the governor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
What I'm saying.
That wasn't my question, but I think we're okay. All right. I have no further questions.
Do you have any redirect, Mr. Wright?
I don't, Judge. Thank you.
Well, Trooper Officer Underwood, it's good to see you again. It's been many years, and be excused.
No, thanks, sir.
Yeah. Now you have next witness.
Judge, I will briefly call Detective Wales.
Detective Wells, will you raise your right hand? You swear the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
You may proceed.
Detective Wales, you are presently employed with the sheriff's office there in Cumberland County. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And would you, how many years did you spend with the Kentucky State Police prior to your retirement?
28.
And what positions did you hold with the state police during that 28 years?
Trooper, 14 years. 14 years as detective in general investigation.
And did you assist Detective Underwood with the investigation into this case that you've heard testimony about today?
Yes.
Would you tell the court what role you had in the investigation of this case?
I was on post. Two juveniles and their parents came to post. And I got the information from, of course, to talk to them from the dispatcher. Originally, it was about 11 o'clock on December the 6th or 9th, 2002. They were very excited, told of a murder that had taken place there in Dare County. As soon as I got directions and to the place, I got another trooper, which is B.J. Burton, to take tape statements from him in detail, and we proceeded to the scene. When I got to the scene, I was there to support. Ricky was going to be the case officer, which was decided by supervisor. I collected evidence, did a video of the scene, had another trooper with me, taking photographs, collecting evidence. I think there was several guns collected from the residents that night, several items. I think Ricky collected a couple of items. I listed all of those on what is known as a evidence recovery sheet, KSP 41. All of that was logged in at post. Other than the original information, that was about the gist of what I did. I collected some earplugs and a note that was left, I seem to be by the perpetrator.
Mr. Walker had left that note behind.
It was a very short note.
Were you the first detective on scene?
I think so. There were some troopers there with me. I think there was four of us, there was three troopers, and of course one of them was with me, but I think I was one of the first that was there.
One of those troopers, I believe, was Trooper Gibbs.
Yes.
Who is deceased now.
Yes.
Detective Wells, you followed this case, I think, at least to some degree through the investigation over those next few days, and then later the prosecution. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you, as one of the investigating officers in this case, what is your opinion about Mr. Walker's request to have the record of this file, the record of this case expunged?
I see why he wants it expunged, but I don't agree with it. Because,
Why is that?
well, he's talking about employment. There's so many other things that it will be hidden from that need to be up front, such as, if his employment was going to involve in the school system. That record is that is a very important thing to know, and to be on record, not to be taken lightly.
In your career of 28 years, did you ever investigate a more serious crime than a murder?
No.
Judge, that's the questions I have for Detective Wells. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. April, would you like to inquire of the detective?
Yes. Mr. Daniels, are you,
It's Wells.
Wells.
sorry, it shows Daniels.
That's being shot from the sheriff's office. That's Scott Daniels is the sheriff's
That's
office.
what I wrote down first, and then I corrected it when I saw that.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Wells. So let me ask you this. Are you in favor of expungements at all?
It would, for me, some could be possible if it's a small enough crime. But any large scale crime, I would be against it.
So you disagree with the legislation, the statute that allows expungement for any crime for which there was a pardon? You disagree with that?
Yes.
So you think the legislature was wrong to do that?
Doesn't matter what I think, but yeah.
Well, that's what you were presented for, sir, to tell us what you think. Let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the expungement statute at all? You know anything about it?
Somewhat.
Do you understand that if it's expunged, there will be no record of this?
Correct. It will show that it has been expunged. Is that correct?
And there would, yes, would there be any record left after expungement? Do you know?
No, it just shows an expungement. Is that correct?
Well, I'm asking you, is there any place that the official record will exist of this conviction and the records related to it?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, the statute specifically says if Judge Williams goes ahead and grants expungement, the order will not preclude the prosecutor's office from retaining a non-public record for law enforcement purposes. So Mr. Wright will be able, if he wants it, to retain all the records of this for law enforcement purposes. Did you know that when you made your statement?
No.
No, okay. Does it make any difference to you as a detective based on your experience and your expertise, which I acknowledge, that this crime was committed by a 16-year-old?
Does it do what?
That the crime here, Mr. Walker committed, was committed when he was 16 years old?
I'm aware of that.
I said, does it make any difference to you?
No.
No. You would treat it the same as if the person who committed the crime was 35?
Yes.
Okay. So is it your opinion that every employer, every school should be able to have access to everyone's criminal history?
Yes.
And you would think that would be true even for Class D felonies that have been expunged?
Yes.
That should have been, that could be expunged? So
Yes.
you're really against expungement altogether? I have no further questions.
Right, do you have any inquiry?
No, Judge. I appreciate these officers for appearing relatively short notice, but no further questions, Judge.
Okay, you both may be excused or you're welcome to stay online. Do you have any other witnesses?
I do not, Judge. And let me say, as far as the PSI, I'll have to look to see if I even have a copy of that. I don't want to commit tendering it. But if I do, I will submit it
Well,
to.
if you don't have it, I won't see it. So there will be a problem there. But if you intend for me to see it, will 10 days be enough for you to?
Yes.
I mean, so if you have it, you shall provide it to Mr. April within 10 days, and he'll have 10 days to give notice to us as if he wants to examine anyone that created or bring any proof on that. Now, what about
Can I ask?
besides the pre-sentence investigation report? What was the other document you talking about? The Kentucky State Police reports, I think mentioned. My note says.
Yeah. And Judge, let me ask this. I care just to submit that by email to Mr. April and your office, or I will file that in the court record if you want me to.
Well, what you need to do is you need to electronically file it and then have it served on both of us. So it'll be a part of the record. Okay.
I know generally PSIs don't go into the court record. That's why I asked that.
Well, I thought we were on the police report. I thought we'd already passed up. The mail, I asked you to send me the PSI, but I thought we were on the police report, and the police report are matters of public record.
Okay, so I will file the police report electronically. Make sure that your office, Mr. April,
You can serve it on both of us, and for the purposes of confidentiality of Mr. Walker, there could be things that are confidential information in that in the report, the probation pre-sentence investigation report. There could be social security numbers, that sort of thing. So that's why I suggest that be sent directly to me. And then at some juncture, if someone wants to appeal, there is a procedure I have to go through as far as sealing documents now. So if there's something, so we might agree to redact some things now. For example, you might redact, I'll tell you the best thing to do. You send it to Mr. April before you send it to me. And if there's anything on there that he wants to redact, you redact it before I get to it. Does that make sense? Like social security numbers and things like that.
Is it okay if I do that with everything, the case, the police report and the PSI?
Do what with everything?
Send it to Mr. April first.
Yeah, send it to Mr. April first. I send both of them there and see if there's anything he wants redacted or marked out. And if y'all can't agree on that, we'll have a hearing on things that are not. And that way, once you reach an agreement on redacting that information, the things can be forwarded to me along. I guess at that juncture, Mr. April will know whether he wants to call a witness or not after he sees them. Okay?
Very well.
Your
Thank
Honor,
you, Judge.
Go ahead, Mr. April.
when it comes to filing electronically, I just want to point this out. I think we need to make a change because
I've pulled back on filing electronically. He's going to send it to you, both those documents, and y'all going to talk about information that's redacted. And then when we do that, you can send it back to me. I hadn't thought about the confidentiality I thought about the confidentiality pre-sentence investigation report, and I was focused more on the police report. So now, since we're going to do that with both of them, it's just for the economy. And then at some juncture, I think we need to make a decision on what we do after it's redacted, whether y'all will agree to put it in the record or not, whether you want it in the record or not. I'll have a hearing on that if you don't want it in the record. Okay.
I'm sorry, that was not what I was talking about.
Well,
What I wanted to tell both of you, maybe you know it already, Your Honor, but we need to add, because this is a case from Adair Circuit Court.
right.
When we tried to serve you electronically, they wouldn't do it because you were not added as one of the recipients. So.
Well, they don't like me at the Adair Circuit Clerk's office. You'll find
Now, Judge, that's not true.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, but that's okay. A lot of people don't like me, including some of these officers that have testified because I was a defense lawyer for a long time. But in any event, I like all of them because I'm a different place. So just mail them to me.
Well, I've been sending things to you by email.
Yes.
Is that all right? I mean, not for what you're talking.
It's all right for me, but we're talking about these documents. You talking
No,
about?
no, I'm talking, I'm not talking about the documents.
Okay.
I agree with everything you've said about the documents, but anything else we file electronically about this case, we need to have your name on it or file or email it to you separately.
Well, I wasn't talking about electronically filing anything other than these two documents we're talking about now. And I wasn't aware that they wouldn't allow you to electronically file to the case up there. You know, the bottom line of it is I would figure they'll allow anybody to electronically file anything.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm not making myself clear. They would allow us to file, but we can't add service to you electronically because you're not listed as a recipient, and either one of us is going to have to put your email address in, or maybe Ms. Thompson. But I anticipate we will file some other things unrelated to the PSI, et cetera, electronically. And I just wanted to clarify that's what we're running into. And that's why I am sending you things by separate email.
Okay, what I would suggest, rather than depend upon them adding me to the list, is you electronically file them and then email them to me.
Okay, that's what we did before. That'll be fine.
And you can ask them why they don't like me at the circuit clerk's office.
I will be your advocate, sir.
Be a trick question. They won't know how to answer a trick question.
Well, the record might not be long enough to have all the reasons. You know, as the book says, their name is legion, for they are many. You know, so okay.
We will. Sorry.
Go ahead. Do you have anything else, Mr. April?
No, only to ask this question. I take it that we will either at the next time we meet, we'll either have a form of closing argument, or you will allow us to submit something in lieu of closing argument.
Which one would you two prefer? Because all the evidence isn't in yet. All the evidence isn't in yet, and the possibility of you having additional witnesses, Mr. April, is there if you want to rebut or question anything in these reports. So I'd suggest that both of y'all think about that, and I'm willing to do it either way.
That's fine. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Is there anything else? Okay. Well, go ahead, Mr. April.
Only I want to thank my other witnesses who showed up, and I'm sorry that we didn't call them, but it was in the name of expediency.
Yeah. Well, judicial economy, maybe. So judicial economy. Well, I'm sorry that I've met all of you under these circumstances. I hope you have a joyous holiday and Merry Christmas if that's your faith. Okay. We are now adjourned.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Jessica, are you getting us off record?
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.